owls. Are you ready for today? We're learning about one of my all-time favorite animals. Worms. Earthworms. So these are the worms that when we dig outside, we see them wiggling around. These are the worms that sometimes if we look at a few birds standing in the grass, we see them pull one right out of there. These are earthworms, and we're going to read a book by Claire Llewellyn and Barry Watts, and it has real pictures of real worms. I'm so excited. Dig up any patch of earth in a garden or park. Look closely and you will probably see a wiggly worm. Worms that live in the soil are called earthworms. There are several kinds of earthworms. Most earthworms are reddish brown and about as long as your hand. There are different kinds of worms around the world though, and they come in many colors and many sizes. Some are so tiny that you could barely see them. Others, like the giant earthworm in Australia, is as long as a car. This brandling worm has stripy skin, and that makes it easy to recognize. Let's learn about finding earthworms. Earthworms live in damp soil where there are bits of dead plants to eat. Most of them live near the top of the soil. Earthworms are easy to find. Dig in the garden with a spade or a fork and you are sure to find some in the soil. We'll talk about that later. Earthworms live in the woods, in the meadows, in the gardens. They live under lawns. They live by dead trees and leaves. Worms also love compost piles. So all of that wonderful food that we'd been saving in our classroom, those worms would love to dive in. A worm's body. A worm is a pretty simple animal. It has no skeleton, no bones. It has no lungs. It has no eyes. What? It has no ears. Holy moly. Its body is a tube made of teeny tiny segments. Each segment is filled with liquid and has bristles that help it move. So you can see each little segment. Inside each segment is some liquid, and you can see at the very edge, these bristles, they're sort of like the hairs on the spider legs that we learned about yesterday. Okay, earthworms don't have lungs, but how do they breathe? They have to be able to. Earthworms breathe through their skin. They breathe in the air, the oxygen that's trapped inside the soil. Wow. On wet days, worms' air pockets fill with water, and the worms have to go up to the surface. If they didn't, they might drown underground. Wow. Now this makes me think of something. Sometimes when it's been raining, I notice worms on the sidewalk. That's because they've had to come up out of the ground because it was too wet for them in the dirt and they couldn't breathe anymore. If you ever find a worm on the sidewalk, do me a favor and save that worm. Pick him up and put him right in some grass or some dirt. I love to go on a worm-saving mission right after a good rain. Just walk around the neighborhood, look for worms that might be in trouble, and put them back into the grass. Let's learn about eating. Earthworms eat kind of disgusting stuff. They love to eat rotting parts of dead plants. Now, they don't have eyes or ears or lungs. They also don't have teeth. And they don't have jaws. So the food they eat has to be very, very soft. Sometimes they nibble food with their teeny tiny lips, but usually they just suck it right up. Worms also feed on soil. They eat the dirt. They use the good parts of the soil and it goes through their body. Then they get rid of the waste in a worm cast. A worm cast looks like that. It looks like dirt, but you know what it is? Worm poop! In the daytime, worms usually stay under the soil and feed on the roots of dead plants. At night, when it's dark, they crawl to the surface and search for some delicious dead leaves. And then they drag the leaves right underground into their homes. Let's learn how they move. Worms have strong muscles. There are ring-shaped muscles inside each segment. So remember, worms are made up of these little teeny tiny segments, and inside there's liquid, and inside there's also a very strong muscle. These make their bodies shrink and spread out. Shrink and spread out. Other muscles run along their body and make it grow short or long. A worm's bristles are also very important in helping it move. The worm digs its bristles into the soil to hold itself still, and then it pulls itself. Look at this. A worm moves by pointing its head in the direction it wants to go. It anchors the back of its body, and the head end becomes thicker. Then the worm stretches its body to push through the soil. It anchors the front of its body, and it pulls up its rear. Look at that, real worms moving. If you've ever stretched a rubber band out and let it go, that's a little bit like how a worm's body moves. Worms love to make tunnels, and it pushes its way in the soil by eating it. As the worm moves forward, its body coats the soil with slime. This makes the tunnels stronger, but they'll soon collapse. Worms' tunnels make airy spaces under the soil, and these spaces help the rainwater drain away. The soil becomes looser and finer, and that makes it easier for the roots of all of our plants to grow. Some worms burrow deep underground when the weather is too cold, like in the winter, or too dry. They push down a few feet below the surface and then coil up. Sorry, what was I saying? Oh yes, they push down a few feet below the surface, then coil up and go to sleep. They wake up when the weather gets better. Oh my goodness. We're going to learn about how worms make more worms. How do they make worm babies? Two worms lie next to each other and they wrap themselves in slime. Look at this. Then they have a sticky belt of slime called a saddle. And the worm wriggles out of this belt and leaves it behind. That's where its eggs will be laid. So the worm takes this sticky slime saddle and puts its eggs inside. And it turns into, what's that word that starts with a C? That when a butterfly is a chrysalis, it lives inside of it. A cocoon. A cocoon. It makes it into a cocoon. And it's smaller than even a pea. Whoa. Ooh, look at this. This is what it would look like. Worms' eggs take many weeks or months to grow in the cocoon. At that time, Some of the eggs might not make it. Sometimes just 1 or 2 worms hatch out of the cocoon. It takes 18 months for a young worm to grow up and lay eggs of its own. Young earthworms are about as long as a thumbnail. They are whiter than their parents and they have no saddles at all. Otherwise, they look just the same. Wow, look at all those different sized worms. Friends, I love worms and I love digging for worms, so ask your grown-up if there's a place in your yard that you can dig and try to find some worms. Now remember, these worms love to live outside, so it's always good to put them back in the garden after you've explored. If you have your magnifying glass, maybe take that out and take a look. See if you can see each little segment of the worm's body. See if it's a big worm, if you can see that slimy saddle in the middle. Now, if you don't want to mess with real slimy worms, you can make some worms of your own. Remember, each little owl, you have some Play-Doh, and you might have some more Play-Doh at home. I would like to challenge you today to teach your grown-ups how we make letters out of Play-Doh. Because the first step in making our letters out of Play-Doh, like we used to do in the owl room, is making what? What kind of animal shape do we have to make when we make our letters? We have to make worms. So get out some Play-Doh today, make some worms, and turn them into letters. Very nice. Then get on that Marco Polo and show me what words you have made. Maybe you'll write your name. Maybe you'll write the word worm. Maybe you'll make up a very new word I've never even heard of with all of the letters you make. All right, my owls, I love you even more than I love those worms. I hope you have a very slimy, silly, wormy day. I'll see you soon. Bye.